about to join Don Neuen, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio, and Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience, for a weekly situation report, or SITREP. 18 hours a day, Denise Simon lives her life as an Intel Analyst. 18 hours a day, Don Neuen lives his life in the world of rock and roll. 1 hour each day, Neuen receives a daily SITREP from Simon. Welcome to the Drive Time Situation Report. Fasten your seatbelt. You are now in Don Neuen's car, and he is calling in for his SITREP.
Hello.
What's up, Denise Simon?
How you doing? Happy birthday.
Hey, thank you, girl. Thank you, girl. A big 59. I don't feel it, though. I really don't. Must be my impeccable diet.
Okay.
Butterburgers. Hey, Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you.
Happy Easter.
All right. Same to yous.
And while we're at it, happy Thanksgiving to you, Denise. And
we're going to do them all?
Let's do them all. Happy Independence Day. Happy Veterans Day.
Okay.
I'm just picking all of the holidays that liberals hate. Actually, They don't hate them. They like to receive the benefits of them. They just find the holiday and the history behind it to be offensive, to which I don't care. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Drive Time Sit Rep. My name is Don Neuen. On the other end of this phone call, you got Denise Simon down in her hunker bunker outside of the Tampa, Florida area. I am driving home in terrible weather, Denise. Terrible weather. Everything up here, the water table is saturated. It's at its max. We have had nothing but rain and rain and rain and rain. So, you
didn't get any snow then, because my son's been in some snow.
No, they had snow like in Atlanta and north of Atlanta. We got no snow over the weekend. None.
Okay. All right.
None. And it probably, what your son got was probably gone a matter of hours later.
Well, he had to drive up to Cumming, and he was in serious snow up there.
Well, okay, but that's relative. Serious snow up there is what? Half an inch? Inch and a half?
No, not when the pictures I saw. We were looking, I mean, it did accumulate on some interesting things. He just...
that was Photoshop. I'm sure it was Photoshop.
Okay, through the windshield of his vehicle. Okay.
Right. All right. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I'm driving home after a day at work, a long day at work, despite it being my birthday. And I've called in to Denise, and I'm going to ask her, hopefully I won't get a rejection on this. Denise, this past weekend, Donna and I watched the third installment on a Glenn Beck series on Ukraine. Now, I know you've been following it, and I'm assuming you watched it. I don't know about our listeners. Those of you that have no idea what I'm talking about really need to go into this. Go to, glennbeck.com or Blaze TV or whatever. We subscribe to it. Now, some of these, or one of these, he posted for free. I don't know if the third volume is free or where you can find it. Maybe you can help me out on this, Denise. But I'm assuming you watched this. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. Help me unpack this or unpack this for our listeners. You knew I'd do that to you. And then, with whatever time we have remaining in tonight's show, take us wherever you want to take us, because, quite frankly, I haven't looked at headlines. I haven't looked at anything today. So I have no idea, other than Donna hit me and said Trump was doing a speech up in New Hampshire, which I have to find hilarious.
Manchester. I think he had 7,000 or 8,000, maybe 9,000 there. More than all the other candidates, for sure.
Combined.
Yes.
Combined and squared or cubed or whatever you want to do.
Okay. On the Glenn Beck thing, his final installment, I think you can get actually all three versions for free, because I think what he is doing is trying to say, we've put all this together for you on chalkboards. His third installment is a fairly detailed summary. However, he does make some assertions that he can't prove, and he does say so, but it based on his long work to put version 3 together, which took 4 months, he believes that he can make the conclusion that he made, which is essentially to say that Obama was doing a modern day Iran-Contra. Okay. And I'll just kind of leave it at that, because for the listeners, they really do need to see it. I don't want to lead.
They do. Now, hold on a second, though. He used repeatedly, and this references Iran-Contra, he referenced repeatedly a proxy war, and the fact that the Obama administration engaged using taxpayer dollars in a proxy war that Congress knew nothing about. Is that a safe encapsulation?
For the most part, yes. And I don't want to lead.
Unpack that. Unpack that, though, for the listeners.
Well, I will, but I don't want to lead the listeners / viewers too far, because I do like for people to draw their own conclusions. But Obama did not want to get involved in another war. He was not going to go over to Congress and say, we need to go over and get involved in this war between Ukraine and Russia. Because, I mean, he didn't want a war, and he would be hard pressed to get approval for it anyway. So what he was doing was taking our tax dollars without anybody knowing, which is kind of strange. I'm trying to think who was the Treasury Secretary at the time. I'm guessing it was Jack Lew. I don't know. And we sent some monies, about $1.8 billion over there, under the guise of propping up their economic system. Now, they did need some propping up. And that's the other piece of the story, because we have this Ihor Kolomoisky / Burisma that stole money and stole Ukrainian money, not his money, but I mean, lots of it. And then several other people that stole, like Poroshenko, the previous president. They virtually wiped the treasury clean of Ukraine. There was nothing there. So all of this really came to the attention of the Brits, because a lot of that money was being transferred into European banks in some interesting ways, which came to the attention of the European Union / the Brits, because some of it eventually ended up in some British banks in London. So I've written about this 3 or 4 times.
Hold on, let me interject something. What she's saying, ladies and gentlemen, is the money that was coming out of Ukraine was laundered. And I'm drawing a blank right now on the first set of islands that's pretty much known for money laundering. Then it goes
Cyprus.
to Latvia. Yeah, Cyprus. Then to Latvia. And then it ends up going down into the UK. And that's where the Brits were like, hey, something's wrong with this money. We're going to look into this. Now, what I don't know, Denise, because my memory is failing me, is were they alerted to the 1.8 billion, or were they alerted to like 7 billion?
No, they were alerted to the 7 billion, not the 1.8.
And something else, ladies and gentlemen, the 1.8 billion that was our tax dollars, nobody knows where it is, right, Denise?
Correct.
It's like vanished. Now,
well,
this,
and
this guy,
Beck asserts that it was to pay for the ragtag warriors / army that Kolomoisky was building to fight the Russians.
okay, that guy with the 75 letters in his name owned Burisma, right?
Yeah, that is even a little suspect too. But yes, he and one other person. But Burisma is actually part of a holding company out of Cyprus.
Ooh, didn't think that would be the case. All right, now, he's also, pull the strings together here and explain, I know, it's really convoluted.
I can't.
Explain the relationship that Hunter Biden had, because the fact that he was being paid $83,000 a month to sit on the board when he knew nothing about natural gas is just the tip of the iceberg, right, Denise?
It is. And I came away with kind of a different conclusion on that now. I think that it was purposeful that Hunter Biden was placed on the board by the Obama White House.
Ooh, that adds a little curve to things.
Well, I mean, think about it.
The last few words of your claim.
Yeah, but think about it. Why Hunter? I mean, there's probably 50 other people here in the United States that they could have put on the board to keep the reputation and keep access, right? But because Joe Biden, as vice president, was given 2 assignments as the lead envoy. One was Ukraine and the other was China. Now, I'm going to argue here that I think the matter of China is a much bigger thing than Ukraine will ever be. But that's a whole nother.
Which we have talked about. We talked about that on SITREP like 2 years ago.
Okay, but I think he was purposely put there. And interestingly enough, in poking around, this was no secret to a lot of media out there. I've seen it on German media. I have seen it on British media way back before we ever even knew about it. I mean, I'm looking, you put in Hunter Biden and Burisma and you start looking at newspapers in foreign entities, and they were ringing the bells, including the Washington Post, including the New York Times, long before a phone call between Trump and Zelensky ever happened. So a lot of people were ringing the bells, including CBS. So I think he was purposely put there.
All right, why? Why do you think he was purposely put there?
Because he's a failure as a person. And I think Father Joe just said, all right, here's what we'll do. I'll offer up my son. We'll go put him over there. That way, whatever goes on between the United States and Ukraine will be kept in the family and it won't get out.
Interesting.
But it was out.
Now, according to Beck, he's been tapping the shoulder of Grassley pretty heavily on this.
He was delivering at the end of his third segment, his third production. He was sending all the documents that he had supporting his chalkboards to Grassley and to Senator Ron Johnson. Yes.
All right, let's take a pause here, because what's important about this, at least in my opinion, Denise, is that Beck has gone back to the chalkboards for this. When Beck goes to those chalkboards, usually he's got good information. And we've talked about this before on the SITREP. You know, Beck lost me for a number of years when he got into the, kind of the beginnings of his Glenn Beck TV and started doing a little more preaching than teaching. And he's kind of come back to his old ways, which I like. But whenever he goes to those chalkboards, he's usually spot on. Don't you agree?
Yes.
How spot on do you think he is with this?
Well, I do know all except for the assertion, there's no reason for me not to believe that this was a modern day Iran-Contra. I know everything else to be accurate because I've written, as I said, at least 4 stories. I wrote the 5th one. I was going to put it over on Political Vanguard, but our mutual friend over there got too confused with it, and he just kind of gave up on it because I was going to let him actually put his name on it, and he said no, he didn't know where to go with it because it is convoluted. It's a very convoluted story. And I would argue that while Beck did a very good job in the presentation in the 3-part series, there are many other piece parts to the story. And that's where I'm going to take you a little bit now. I am looking at a September 25th, 2019 congressional record. And on this particular day, Congresswoman Kaptur from Ohio, she got up on the House floor for 5 minutes and kind of went off on Trump and Zelensky and Ukraine. And she knows more based on what she said. She knows more than what she put out there, but she just kind of wanted this to be her little contribution to the scandal.
All right, hold it right there. September 25th, 2019, right?
Correct.
Okay. Remember that date, ladies and gentlemen. There's other stuff that happened on that day, right, Denise?
Yes, which is why it's very curious that she's speaking on the House floor on this very day. And I'm not going to read everything that she said, but I'll kind of give you some snippets in here. She said, let me remind all of you that the collapse of the communist Russia in 1991, officially known as blah, 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 and that Russia began its jagged path forward to the free world, that there was a plot with President Trump and Paul Manafort. And she goes on to this, and the Russian political operatives in Ukraine. And she's going on and on and on about this stuff. Then she gets to a very interesting thing because she's from Ohio. Well, our little friend, Mr. Kolomoisky, happened to buy a whole bunch of real estate in Ohio. And most of that real estate had to do with steel production, piping, those kinds of interesting things. She says
Hold on. Just in case the listeners missed it, tell them who he is one more time.
He is one of the oligarchs that owns Burisma.
There you go.
Okay. So she goes on to say that the Ukrainian oligarch who owned the television station that made, and she's right here, that made the current president of Ukraine famous, meaning Zelensky.
Same guy. The same guy.
Correct. Is now the largest commercial real estate owner in Cleveland. Kolomoisky has a net worth of $1.2 billion. He travels between Ukraine, Cyprus, Israel, and Ohio. In fact, his son played on the basketball team for Cleveland State University.
Fascinating.
Yes.
It is.
Okay, now this oligarch ran the show, and he propelled Zelensky to stardom, which he did. Another reason why Trump would be suspect of all things. Zelensky is the man sincere. Then she goes on to say, Madam Speaker, I include a material record to the remarks of this morning, and she introduces some interesting things, including a legal complaint filed last month, meaning August of 2019, in Delaware, where attorneys for a major Ukraine bank allege that 2 oligarchs who founded the bank and controlled it from 2006 to 2016 laundered hundreds of millions of dollars in fraudulent corporate loans to purchase assets in the United States and unjustly enriched themselves and their associates. Now, this thing was called Optima, it was dubbed Optima Schemes. And there's a 104-page criminal complaint, if you will, in Delaware, which I was just looking up a little while ago, trying to get to my hands on that criminal or that complaint. So the point being, she goes on to say, with the money siphoned from public bonds and 20 million of private Ukraine citizens' monies in their accounts with the private or Privat bank, the oligarchs Igor Kolominsky and Gennady, whatever his name is, I can't even begin to pronounce his last name. They were doing loans to shell companies that they controlled. They used the private bank as their own piggy bank.
All right, hold on. The Privat or the Privat bank is owned by who?
Well, it was owned by them, and then Ukraine nationalized the bank. Now I believe it's gone private again, and the reason it's gone private again is because of the big money from the International Monetary Fund, led by former Prime Minister Theresa May, to stabilize the country.
There you go. And that, if I'm not mistaken, is the other big thing that took place on, what was it, September 25th, 26th?
Or was happening, yes. And we were sending an envoy over there to say, okay, kind of like, here's your money, but these are the conditions, and you better behave. And this was not only done by some representatives from the European Union of their money laundering division, if you will, whatever that is, the International Monetary Fund, and I would say some leaders of some other countries that happened to be hosting some of these shell companies that were also, too, getting screwed. So the point being, we don't know the beginning of this whole thing, but we're never going to know the end of it either because it's so big.
And who's going to investigate this? If unless it's being investigated now and you know the answer, who do you think will try to blow the top off of this thing?
Well, what happens here is it actually changes when Trump says the call was perfect. We all are sitting out here going, well, yeah, maybe you think it's perfect. But we're all kind of going, meh, you probably could have, kind of handled it a different way. However,
I knew there was a big however.
His point of reference is very different on what the definitions of the words were that he used in the conversation than Lieutenant Colonel Vindman or an Adam Schiff. Okay, so if you go through the three segments of Beck, then you go look at the phone call again, all of a sudden you come away with very different context. Different context.
And we all have to remember something, Denise, that we've talked about over and over on this show. Trump knows a lot of stuff that none of us know. Right?
Yeah. Now, here's the other fascinating thing. This congresswoman went on to list the pieces of real estate that the Kolomoisky operation actually owns in Cleveland. And I mean, they're pretty significant.
All right, hold on. You got 30 seconds. Can you tell it in 30 seconds?
No, it doesn't matter. I was just going to say that there are several of them, probably 7 or 8 of them, and they're really quite significant. And she's also introducing some other companies in there, Bacatoro Enterprises, a couple other things, Sage Hospitality Group. There's some other things that are going on, including Divot Enterprises, Ralcon Commercial, Pavanti Enterprises. So she knows more than she's saying, but she was very select about what she put into the congressional record that day.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Drive Time SITREP with Denise Simon. My name is Don Neuen. We've got to take a quick commercial break. We will be right back.
Check us out on the web at cowboylogic.us.
Welcome back to the Drive Time SITREP. Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Don Neuen. You've got on the other end of this conversation the stellar Denise Simon. Denise, please pick up where we left off.
Well, for the listeners out there, if you get a chance and if you're good at searching some things out, you may want to look up Optima schemes or Optima anything out of Delaware, which would include Optima Management. But again, there's a couple of names that are interesting. One is Chaim Choquette.
Hold on. Is there any reason that they're coming out of Delaware?
Well, that's where, 50%, maybe 60, 70% of the corporations in the United States are registered in Delaware. The rest of them come out of Las Vegas.
All right, so it doesn't have anything to do with Biden.
I would doubt it. I mean, that's kind of a knee-jerk reaction, but almost everything is a Delaware corporation.
All right, keep going.
Okay, so we were talking about before the break the context or the view in Trump's head, knowing what Trump likely knew that was being shared with him by several, and I would also say Treasury, Rudy Giuliani, and a couple of Rudy Giuliani's friends, even probably Steve Mnuchin. Okay, so
Hold
there
on.
was
Let me ask you a question. How spot on do you think Giuliani is?
Well, I don't know what he has. I know what he said, but I don't know what he has. So I can't draw a conclusion there. But I do know that he's been to the right places so far. Okay.
I happen to think he's spot on, and I hope he is. I pray.
Well, he's no neophyte at this because of being the prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. I mean, so he's not a rookie at any of this by a long stretch.
Correct.
Now, last week, and in several text messages later with some mutual acquaintances, everybody's come to hate on John Bolton. And I completely reserve judgment on that. And here's the reason why. When I left the third segment of Beck's production, I kept saying to myself, where does John Bolton fit in? And then it dawned on me. I believe that between Attorney General Barr, Steve Mnuchin, Grassley, Johnson, Ted Cruz, and several others, they have probably gone into their own countermeasure, counterintelligence measure, to flush out those on the National Security Council. Because remember, what we are told is that John Bolton submitted a manuscript. Not the final version by a long stretch, but a manuscript of his book to the White House with a cover letter. And it is to be reviewed, and they can, add, take out, amend, redact, whatever they want to do before it goes back to Bolton, that he has to make some changes before it goes to a publisher. And all of a sudden, what happened 3 weeks after that? The New York Times gets a tip of there was an assertion in the book made by, in the text of the book, that Trump pressured John Bolton for Ukraine to make a public announcement about corruption, right?
Correct.
Okay. We don't know what the tip was, and we don't know who delivered the tip to the New York Times. The only thing that the only reaction he had was from his attorney that said nobody from the Bolton team, including his lawyers, leaked anything that would be a contravention to national security. and to classified material. That's the only thing he said. So I almost believe here that this was a reverse plot to begin to flush out some of these people on the National Security Council, because now Robert O'Brien, who took Bolton's place, he's cleaning house. And what happened this past Friday? Well, we got rid of the Vindman twins, did we not?
Correct.
And today, another 70 were terminated. 70.
Oh, really?
Yes. Now,
how many of those were actually terminated, and how many were moved into different cubicles?
Well, I can tell you this. They were terminated from the National Security Council. Where they go after that, we don't know. But they were terminated from their assignment on the National Security Council. Walked out the door. Okay?
Yep.
Now, Robert O'Brien, which I have said, and you've heard me say, either get rid of the National Security Council altogether or move them out of the building and move them into an empty hangar that's unair conditioned and unheated over at Dulles Airport.
Yep.
Robert O'Brien has said that he wants to get the size of the National Security Council down to about 100 people, which would be the same size that George W. Bush had during all things post 9/11 and post 9/11. So,
and where did Barack Obama take it to?
Well, interestingly enough, if you hear Devin Nunes tell you that the entire staff, including aides and lawyers and clerks and all the other kind of stuff, it was around 600.
Wow.
Yes. You can't herd cats and maintain any kind of control with 600. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I believe this was a countermeasure plot. And with this, they have sent a message to Vindman, who, by the way, was going to rotate out anyway. He was supposed to leave in March. That was part of his rotation. He had already applied to go to the War College, and now he got accepted in the War College, so he was going to the War College in February. So, of course, everybody's dancing up and down and yelling and screaming, saying this is retribution, this is a Friday night massacre, blah, 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 which it clearly wasn't. They just escalated his exit. And they did so with earnest because he was escorted out by Secret Service.
Right.
Okay.
I'm not real excited about that guy because I don't trust the guy.
Well, I don't either.
I mean, shouldn't he be going to the War College over in Ukraine?
Well, maybe so. But I think there's some other things that are going on that I've been hoping for a very long time. And, I've talked about them on several shows, that now is the time to strike while the iron is getting warm. It needs to go back to hot again, because I want some things declassified and I want some certain actions taken. Okay.
Yep.
Well, something tells me that some of that may be underway. Now, why would I say that? Well, because of today that we got rid of about 70 people off the National Security Council. The other fascinating thing that came out today was that the Department of Justice is suing the state of New Jersey and Kings County, Washington, because they are obstructing federal agents, meaning ICE and Customs and Border Patrol, from doing their job, causing the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security real hardship. So now they're fighting back, aren't they?
Good.
Then the next thing that happened was the Department of Justice announced the names of 4 members of the Chinese military that they were able to legitimately attribute, and attribution is the most difficult thing, but to attribute the hack of Equifax to, which cost Equifax $700 million, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So I think there's some other things.
So hold on a second. Are they pinning that on the Chinese army or just these 4 guys?
Well, these 4 guys were in the Chinese military.
I get it. But are they considering that an act of the Chinese military or just these 4 rogue characters?
I think they're probably, I haven't read all the criminal complaints, but all 4 of them, but they're one and the same.
Okay. Yep.
So what I see here is some real movement where it needs to be. And we're out here wanting the little things to happen. We want, Flynn to get probation and for that case to go away. And we want, Hillary here, and we want Adam Schiff over there. What they're doing is they're going for a much bigger thing. And I wrote about this last week, that while we're hearing that Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler are all working on impeachment part 2, because there are several cases sitting in courts right now where they're expecting some decisions on. And they got one fascinating decision last week where the whole Trump emoluments thing got thrown out and sent back to a lower court with the instructions to dismiss. So I see some things.
Last week was huge. Last week was epically huge, don't you think?
I do. And so what I'm trying to say here is I think there's some other things that are going on if you start putting all these things together on a table, where the Department of Justice, this White House, Treasury, and the other thing that the Department of Homeland Security did with the state of New York on terminating the Global Traveler Program for New Yorkers, because New York terminated access to the Department of Motor Vehicles database. So they're fighting back, and they're fighting back in some very interesting ways. Now, while I was poking around in all this nonsense, I came across yet another document that I hadn't seen in a very long time. It was 85 pages. And the document is from the Select Committee on Intelligence from the U.S. Senate. This was Russian active measures, campaigns, and interference. Not the Mueller report, but this was the Senate version from 2016 election. So I said, okay, let's go through this, because, there's some things in there that are still redacted, and I get it. But a lot of the concentration was on the Internet Research Agency. And then they were putting some pressures on Facebook and on Twitter and blah, 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 blah. But here's an interesting thing in here that I did not know. And that was that this troll operation that came out of the Internet Research Agency was also pushing and endorsing Jill Stein and Bernie Sanders. They really wanted Bernie Sanders. They knew they were going to get Hillary. They wanted Bernie Sanders to go up against Trump. Isn't that fascinating? So then today...
Does it explain why?
Well, yeah. It fractures the country, and it keeps it fractured, doesn't it?
There you go.
Okay. So then I got to thinking today, Bernie Sanders keeps saying that he's got all these donors and they're $25 or less, $25 or less. Well, I think any donation under whatever amount of money never gets investigated, regardless of where it originated from. Don't you just kind of wonder how much of his $25 or less donations may be foreign?
Yeah. Good question.
Yes.
Good point. Good point. So the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, or whatever it was called, that I have this thing, they made it, if you get to the end of the report, they're making all these recommendations. Fascinating recommendations. We need to do this with Twitter. We need to do this with social media. We need to have a committee that does this. We need to do that. And we keep hearing that Russia's doing the same thing. Today that they were doing back in 2016. Maybe not to the volume, but they're still out there doing it. But nobody in the Senate and nobody in the House has taken any kind of introduction of any kind of legislative measures
or taken any of the recommendations that came out of this report and gone any further. So, because Congress hasn't done it, now it's really forcing the Trump administration, meaning the Department of Justice, to kind of do these things. So, fascinating, the questions that don't get asked of these Democrat candidates for president, isn't it?
Oh, of course, and they're not going to be asked that. Hey, by the way, Denise, I am sitting absolutely still on I-20. I've been sitting still. You haven't heard any road noise because I'm sitting still. Yeah, man, I tell you what, this sucks. Nobody's moving. Hey, let me ask you this: why do you think? Clearly, at least in my opinion, the reason that the Democrats are so rabidly trying to get rid of Trump is you just don't behave that way because you don't like somebody or you disagree with their policies. You try to get rid of somebody because he's about to expose what you've done or what people you're protecting have done. Do you believe, well, let me rephrase the question. Why do you believe that Schiff and Nadler and Nancy Pelosi and all of the Democrats are trying so hard from day one to get Trump out of office?
I don't think it's really Trump.
What do you think it is?
I think it's to gain back power of the White House and both houses because they want the Supreme Court back. They want control of that Supreme Court.
You don't think it's to cover any of this stuff we've been talking about?
Well, I do. But look, let's go back a little bit. Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff knew all along that impeachment was never going to go anywhere. They knew all along. I mean, we all knew it, and we're nobodies, right? We all
clearly the impeachment, okay. The most recent impeachment hoax was due to it was nothing but a political move trying to damage him or label him as damaged goods for the 2020. But if you go back to January of 2017, they were calling for his impeachment then. Why?
They wanted, well, one is they wanted to change the midterms, and that worked. They got the House back.
True.
Okay, so now let's do it again, and let's go get the Senate back, and let's put Chuck Schumer in there.
Mm-hmm.
They want the one word that really gave it all away during the impeachment trial in the Senate was the one word that Jerry Nadler used, and the word was treachery. He was alleging treachery on every Republican senator. He gave it away. He gave away the game as soon as he said that word. They want to destroy the Republicans forever. Forever. Now they never knew, they always knew they were never going to get John Bolton to testify, or Mick Mulvaney, or any of those others. It wasn't going to happen, and they knew it. So what did Jerry Nadler and Adam Schiff sell? They sold us on an emotional, concocted crime and alleged future crimes that never happened. If we don't do this now, he will be a tyrant. He will violate the Constitution from here on out. They're selling that's all they did was sell emotion. So what did the Trump defense team sell back? They sold the facts. And the facts were that the impeachment process into itself was unconstitutional because it did not follow the rules of the House to start with. They had to vote, okay? And that was overlooked I don't know how many times. That poor Philbin had to say it I don't know how many times. God bless him.
Right.
And for those who are paying attention, some of the Republicans got it, but none of the Democrats did. None of them, including our little Miss Democrat here that I told you was in the congressional report that knew about Ukraine and Ohio.
Right.
Okay. So they didn't care about the realities. They didn't care about facts in context. And here's another interesting thing is that in 2017, Trump actually increased the weapons going to Ukraine.
Correct.
And those ever pesky Javelin missiles.
Correct.
I was actually reading yet another piece that they were never going to be used. They're only there as kind of Ukraine's version of a nuclear weapon. They've never been used. They were never intended to be used. They're sitting 250 miles from the battlefield in a warehouse, and it is propaganda that Ukraine's going to buy more. That's just a message to Moscow. So
all right.
we have.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What I'm trying to say here is, listen to words very carefully, because I think an awful lot of people are trying to give us almost, some hidden language here. They're trying to tell us a different kind of a story, and we're so emotional, we're not hearing it clearly.
Especially Devin Nunes.
I was just going to say that.
Every time he's on the TV, he is doing his darndest to give us information. And you just gotta sit there and think about what the guy's saying and try to figure out what he's not saying. Right?
Absolutely. To the point where you almost have to make notes.
Yeah. All right, we got about 5 minutes left, Denise. 2 questions for you. Number one, and without getting into it a lot, do you think anything's going to come out of the Durham report that is going to put smiles on our face?
I can't. You wanted me to prognosticate on that one, and I can't. But when I wrote about the article last week that Nadler, Schiff, and Pelosi are going to go for round 2 of impeachment, that's the shot across the bow that they're kind of, shooting out there. That's a trial balloon. And it's kind of like, they better be careful for what they ask for, because there's a lot of things that the Republicans have in their pipeline, least of which is the Durham thing. And by the way, the Horowitz IG report is hardly a settled matter, especially when it comes to all things FBI. So it's kind of like, be very careful, because there are probably more arrows in the quiver of the Trump administration power people than are in the quiver of the Democrats right now in the House.
Well, I know it is the forever optimist in me, but I can't think of a better silencing moment than a few high-profile perp walks in March or April.
Well, I can tell you that there are some interesting people out there doing some very interesting work. It's almost like as though they have been assigned. A couple people over there at the Federalist Society have been assigned to, go through the IG report with a fine-tooth comb. You've got a couple people that are making those comparisons, by the way, back to the Mueller report in those footnotes, going back to Crossfire Hurricane, going back to some new names that are tied to Stefan Halper and Joseph Mifsud. So those gears are still processing. They haven't come to, there's not any sand in those gears. And I do think that this whole thing between Giuliani and Bolton and the National Security Council and the Trump thing, I think this all, came away with this whole thing is a ploy. It's a reverse countermeasure. Because they flushed out some people, didn't they?
Yeah, and that's awesome. That's awesome. I think that, as you've said many times, we've said it on this show, man, Denise, I can't see the end of the red lights. I'm never going to get home. We could do a 5-hour show and I still wouldn't be off I-20.
Man, is it raining still?
Just slightly. Anyhow, we need some good perp walks, and timing's everything. And there's nobody better at timing than Trump. I want to see some good perp walks. I think that would just take every bit of wind out of the sails of the Democrat Party.
Well, I think some of this today, with the announcement that's coming out of the Department of Justice formally suing the state of New Jersey in Kings County, Washington, under their sanctuary policies. So there had to be a handful of cases there that were really obstructing federal agents, if you will, marshals and ICE and so forth, that they looked very hard at the law in order to file these two lawsuits. So it's almost as though we're going to start floating these things out there, and I hope there's more to come that would necessarily include New York, which they kind of already did because now they've taken New Yorkers out of the Global Traveler Program, Chicago, Oakland, San Francisco, Los Angeles. So I think there's some fascinating things that I know are on the highway. I just don't know what ramp they're taking.
All right, you got less than a minute. Coronavirus, less than a minute, 45 seconds.
Well, I would tell you that they can't control it, and there's their problem. It's out of control, and we are sending all kinds of people over there, even though China refuses to have them. But we're going over there just to get our own assessments because we know that China has lied before. They lied about SARS, and we found that out. So I think they haven't been able to control this, even though they've sequestered and quarantined 50 million people.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the Drive Time Sit Rep with Don Neuen and Denise Simon. This show will air on... Oh, hey, you know what, Denise? We didn't timestamp it. Timestamp it real quick.
Oh, well, it's 9:42 p.m. on the 10th of February, year of our Lord 2020.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next week. Denise, take us home.
Thanks for being with us, and God bless America.
Check us out on the web at cowboylogic.us.